Say these 4 lines, and suddenly the entire energy of a police stop changes. The officer who was asking questions, taking control, maybe even trying to pressure you, slows down, reconsiders. And in many cases, the stop ends much faster than you expected. But here's the part nobody tells you. These lines only work if you understand exactly when to say them, how to say them, and what's really happening behind the scenes. Because if you get this wrong, even slightly, you can accidentally make things worse. So before we go any further, let me ask you something honestly. Have you ever been pulled over and felt like you were guessing your way through the conversation, not really sure what you were supposed to say, or what you should stay quiet about? I want you to answer that in the comments. Seriously, because most people have been there, and your experience matters more than you think. Now stay with me, because by the end of this, you're going to see police stops in a completely different way, and you'll understand exactly how to handle them without panic. Let's get into it. First, you need to understand something very important. A police stop is not just a conversation. It's a controlled interaction. The officer is trained. You are not. They know what they're doing, what to ask, and how to guide the situation. Most people don't realize this. But from the moment those lights turn on behind you, the officer is already observing everything. Your speed, your reaction time, where you pull over, your body language, your hands, even how long it takes you to respond. By the time they reach your window, they've already started forming an opinion. And then comes the first question. Do you know why I stopped you? This is where most people make their first mistake. It sounds casual, almost friendly, but it's not. It's a strategic question. Because whatever you say next can be used as an admission. I think I was speeding. I didn't see the sign. I might have rolled the stop. You think you're being honest, cooperative, respectful, but from a legal perspective, you just made their job easier. Now here's where the first line comes in. Instead of guessing, instead of admitting anything, you calmly say, "Officer, I'd prefer not to answer any questions." That's it. Simple, respectful, clear. You're not being rude, you're not being aggressive. You're just choosing not to provide information that could be used against you. And here's what happens next. The officer has to adjust. Because now, the conversation didn't go the way they expected. Most people talk. You didn't. Now let's move to the second line because this is where things get more powerful. At some point, the officer may continue asking questions. Where are you coming from? Where are you going? Have you had anything to drink? This is where you say, I invoke my right to remain silent. Now listen carefully. This is not just a phrase, this is a legal boundary. When you clearly say you are invoking your right, it changes the nature of the interaction. You're no longer just being quiet. You are asserting a constitutional protection. And that matters, because now continued questioning becomes legally sensitive. But here's the mistake people make. They say this, and then they keep talking. That completely defeats the purpose. If you invoke your right, you have to actually remain silent. No explaining, no side comments, no just one more thing. Silence. And that silence does something very interesting. It removes the officer's biggest tool, your words. Now let's talk about the third line. This one is critical, and almost nobody uses it correctly. At some point, you need to understand your status. Are you being detained, or are you free to go? So you ask calmly, am I being detained, or am I free to go? This question forces clarity. Because legally, there's a difference between a temporary stop and an extended detention. If the officer says you're free to go, that's your moment. You leave. If they say you're being detained, now you know the situation is more serious, and you stop trying to talk your way out of it. You stay calm, you stay silent, you don't escalate. Now here comes the fourth line, and this is where things often shift quickly. If the officer asks to search your vehicle, your belongings, or anything else, you say, I do not consent to any searches. This line is extremely important, because if you give consent, even casually, you've just given up a major legal protection. And here's the reality. Many searches happen simply because people say, yeah, go ahead. Not because the officer had strong legal grounds, but because permission was given. When you clearly say you do not consent, you preserve your rights. Now here's what you need to understand. Saying these 4 lines does not mean you win. It does not mean the officer has to instantly let you go. What it does is limit the scope of the interaction. It prevents you from accidentally giving away information. It forces the officer to operate strictly within legal boundaries. And in many cases, that results in a shorter, more controlled stop. But let me warn you about something very important. Your tone matters just as much as your words. If you say these lines with attitude, sarcasm, or aggression, you're escalating the situation. If you say them calmly, respectfully, and confidently, you're protecting yourself without creating tension. There's a huge difference. Now let's talk about a real-world scenario, because this is where it all comes together. You're driving at night. You get pulled over. The officer approaches, asks the usual question. Instead of guessing, you stay neutral. You provide your license and registration. You don't volunteer extra information. The officer asks where you're coming from. You calmly say, "I'd prefer not to answer any questions." They push a little further. You say, "I invoke my right to remain silent." Now the tone changes. They either proceed with the reason for the stop, or they realize they're not getting more out of you. You ask, "Am I being detained, or am I free to go?" If there's no strong reason to hold you, the stop ends. Not magically, not instantly, but efficiently. And that's the key. This is not about tricks. This is about understanding how the system works. Most people lose control of these situations because they don't realize what's happening. They think talking helps. They think explaining helps. Sometimes it does, but often it doesn't. And once you've said something, you can't take it back. That's why controlled silence is so powerful. Now here's something I want you to really think about. Officers are trained to gather information. You are not trained to protect yourself under pressure. That's the imbalance. These 4 lines don't make you smarter than the officer. They simply level the playing field. They give you structure. They give you control. And most importantly, they prevent you from making the kind of mistakes that people regret later. Because the truth is, most problems don't come from what the officer does. They come from what people say. And once you understand that, everything changes. So next time you see those lights behind you, you won't panic. You won't guess. You'll stay calm, controlled, and aware of exactly what's happening. And that alone can completely change the outcome.